Welcome back. Thank you so much for your company tonight. I think it's fair to say the world is incredibly frustrated that Vladimir Putin's war in Ukraine cannot be stopped, and he continues to face seemingly no justice. Ever since this war began, there have been reports of war crimes. We've heard about executions in Bucha, attacks on civilian facilities across Ukraine, and other illegalities that seem to continue unabated. But without too much publicity, on the ground, there is a team of United Nations investigators who are gathering the evidence that will be required if we want to prove what Ukrainian people and their officials are alleging, that there's been a deliberate campaign of human abuse without any concern for the lives of the innocent. One of those investigators in Ukraine is Australia's Matilda Bogner, who's head of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine. She joins me now from Uzhhorod in western Ukraine. Matilda, thank you very much for your time. I find this area fascinating, but just to be general about what's going on, we're hearing all sorts of numbers in terms of deaths and injuries. What are we to believe? How many people have lost their life? How many in that part of the world?
Well, we're seeing that thousands of people have lost their lives in Ukraine since the 24th of February, when the Russian attack on Ukraine started. We have ourselves documented over 3,300 deaths of civilians. And these are individually documented cases, but the actual numbers are significantly higher. It's difficult for us to access all areas in Ukraine, and particularly where there are significant hostilities ongoing. For example, Mariupol has been an area that's very hard for us to access, and we estimate that there have been thousands of deaths just in that city alone. But as I said, we have documented over 3,300 individual cases of civilians having been killed since the 24th.
But your hunch is that we could be looking at up to 6,000, even at this stage?
Well, we don't know exactly. It's not until we're able to verify each individual case that we will know the exact figures, and that will take time.
When you say document and investigate, I just want to know whether, does this involve a combination of obtaining anything official, interviewing locals, interviewing officials, and forensic investigation? Is it that thorough?
We talk to victims and witnesses. We try to get first-hand accounts, but we also take into account official information and a range of other sources. We also do look at available video and other photographic evidence. We take into account all areas. As I said, the problem is that we don't always have access to areas that are under severe hostilities, and so that does limit our ability in some cases to fully investigate. But what we're doing is a human rights investigation, and that information will be made public, but we are not a court of law. Hopefully these types of issues will go on to a court of law, whether that's at the national level or whether that's at the international level, such as with the International Criminal Court.
How do you personally endure this kind of exposure on the ground to that kind of bloody scene and the stories that you're hearing? Is there a time period at which they call on you to leave? Like, how do you handle the reality of what's going on there?
Well, last week I was in areas north of Kiev, meeting with victims, with people who had suffered through weeks of Russian occupation. They were telling me their stories, and certainly it's very difficult to listen to those stories and to understand the suffering that people have been through. But it's important to collect that information so that the world can understand what has been happening here, and so that further into the future accountability can happen, as well as trying to prevent further such violations from occurring.
So how do you handle that individually?
Well, I mean, for me, it's important that there will be justice. It's important to try to prevent further violations. So although it's very difficult to listen to these stories, to document these issues, I see the importance of it, and that keeps me going.
Prima facie, can I ask you this question? Do you think Russia has violated human rights and carried out war crimes?
You know, in every war that has a significant level of hostilities, unfortunately, there are always human rights violations and violations of international humanitarian law, sometimes amounting to war crimes. And we've definitely seen this in Ukraine. It is not only one side; all sides have violated human rights, and we are documenting that. Unfortunately, the scale of violations on the Russian side is significantly higher, and we have been documenting those and will continue to document.
What are some of the obstacles you're facing to determine the truth?
Well, as I said, access to certain areas is very difficult due to hostilities. It means that we often need to do remote monitoring. We need to speak to people from a distance, or we speak to people after they've left areas, such as IDPs who have fled these areas. But it often means also that we can't physically look at an area where an alleged violation has taken place, which limits our ability to assess in full the evidence that would otherwise be available.
We've heard individual stories of Russian soldiers turning on their own side. Are Russian soldiers providing you with evidence as well?
To date, we have not spoken to Russian soldiers who are involved in direct hostilities. No, not at this point.
Do you think at some stage in our lifetime we will see justice served?
I hope so. That is part of the point of doing this monitoring and documenting. I suppose history has shown that it's often very difficult to get accountability, but there's accountability at different levels. The highest form of accountability is if cases are taken to court and people are sent to prison or have other punishments given to them. But I think even the fact of the world finding out exactly what is happening, of the scale of the horror of these types of violations, is a form of accountability, as well as, I hope, can be a form of prevention to stop these from continuing, at least at the levels that have happened so far.
Thank you for what you and your team do and what they're doing at the moment under very, very trying and emotional circumstances. And thank you for your time tonight, Matilda.
Thank you very much.